Hello everyone, my name is Laura Locke. I'm working on a few projects for Autism Calgary, and the most recent project I've been working on is Autism Spectrum Disorder and Seniors. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a former teacher. I am married and we have 3 children, and our youngest is Peter, who is 29 and who is on the autism spectrum. And I would like to talk to you today about how autism spectrum disorder affects seniors. And so let's begin. First of all, I just wanted to show you a little bit about Autism Calgary, some of the wonderful things that are happening there, some of the different outreach initiatives that we have, such as the pantry, thanks to Calgary Co-op, their support. We have individual family support, as well as lots of support groups and social activities and employment and volunteer projects. We're big on advocacy for our families, and we have a lovely little library and a great staff as well again. So first of all, what is autism and what is autism spectrum disorder? This is now the formal name, ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder. It's gone through a few permutations over the decades, and it is a condition related to brain development. Researchers have done some research into the genetics and have identified a number of genes that are associated with ASD. And they believe that environmental factors might also play a role, but no specific environmental factors have been identified. And it's called a spectrum disorder because there is such a wide spectrum of severity of symptoms. And from people who are, nonverbal and very intellectually disabled to people who are very verbal and very intelligent, and people that have social deficits, people that do not have that, and everything in between. So autism does, though, affect a person's perceptions and their interactions with the world around them in some way. And our understanding of autism spectrum disorder is always evolving and expanding. And so I'm going to talk just a little bit about the history of ASD. So it was first mentioned in the literature by someone named Eugene Buehler, a Swiss psychiatrist, who first coined the term autismus, is what he called it. And so that is translated into English, it is autism. And it derives from the Greek word autos, which means withdrawn or self-absorbed. And he used the term to describe a symptom of schizophrenia. It wasn't until 1943 that Leo Kanner, who you might have heard about, who was an Austrian-American psychiatrist, first used the word autism in its modern sense. And he had been studying 11 children in a psychiatric practice that he had, that they were labeled as disturbed, and he noticed some striking similarities between them. An insistence on sameness, he described, and also autistic aloneness. So he named the condition early infantile autism. Then Hans Asperger came along very shortly after that, a German scientist who described a milder form of autism that we called Aspergers Syndrome. And that term is still being used widely, even though it's not officially part of the vocabulary anymore, but lots of people do use it. So he was looking at a group of boys who were highly intelligent, but had trouble with social interactions. And in 1980, infantile autism was listed in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and that's when it was separated from schizophrenia, which is what it was previously linked to. So, quick question, what about Asperger's syndrome? So, it was a distinct category between 1994 and until May 2013. And then it was folded into this general new category called Autism Spectrum Disorder. And why was that? Is partly because there was clinicians all over the world that were using criteria for Asperger's syndrome inconsistently. And so they decided to just remove the status of Asperger's syndrome as a distinct category of its own and instead have it part of this spectrum. And so now we, autism spectrum disorder describes people having severity levels between 1 and 3, and that's based on their need for support. So level 1 would be in need of relatively low levels of support. And so that would be what we would, this group we would formally probably have called Asperger's syndrome. Level 2 means requiring substantial support, and level 3 means requiring very substantial support. So what are some of the common symptoms of ASD? We'll look at each of these in turn, but people who have been diagnosed with ASD typically experience difficulties in 3 areas: communication abilities, social interactions, and a lack of flexibility in thinking and behavior. So we'll talk more about those. So the features of ASD. So here's some kind of interesting statistics that I found there's of course a lot of stuff out there about ASD and some wonderful books and websites and also some papers that published papers that can really shed a lot of light on ASD once you begin doing some research. So 25% of individuals with ASD are nonverbal. 31% have an intellectual disability, 25% are in the borderline IQ range, but 44% have average or above average intelligence. So you've probably heard this phrase, but it's very true. If you have met one person with ASD, you have met one person with ASD. People on the spectrum are 8 times more likely to have gastrointestinal or digestion problems. And 20 to 30% develop a seizure disorder by adulthood. This is a very interesting statistic. 90 to 100% experience sensory processing disorder, and we're going to be talking about that in a bit as well. So what about the prevalence of ASD? This has, of course, changed drastically over the years, but in 2018, statistics show that 1 in 59 children, approximately, have been identified with ASD. So I always think of that as a teacher, that I know that in every school, there's going to be, a fair number of children with ASD, whether they have been diagnosed or not. ASD is 4 times more common among males than females. And unlike some other neurological disorders, ASD occurs in all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups, as far as we know. So it's all over the world. ASD in adults and seniors. Well, since ASD is considered a lifelong disorder, it makes sense that we would have similar numbers of adults who would also have the disorder. So that would mean about 1 in 59. However, in my experience, a lot of especially older adults have either never received a diagnosis of ASD or been misdiagnosed, sadly. Some of the things I've heard of from adults is being diagnosed with schizophrenia, OCD, anxiety disorders, depression, and the list goes on. There are health problems specific to adults and seniors with ASD. So as compared to the general population, they are 19 times more likely to have epilepsy, for instance, 6 times more likely to have Parkinson's disease, 25 times more likely to develop a form of psychosis, 11 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts or engage in self-injury. 22 more times likely to have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We're now going to watch a short video that my husband and I produced about a Calgary senior named Heather who was diagnosed with ASD. And this video is about 4.5 minutes long. Hope you enjoy it.
You know, in those days they didn't understand about autism and mental health as much. So they figured when I started seeing a professional, they figured, that's a sign of weakness, mental illness. So the Conant Centre arranged with social services so on to get me into accommodation, and they put me through all that, and I was accepted, and here I am.
Getting your diagnosis in 2000 of Asperger's, how was that? How did that feel? Was that a helpful thing?
It felt like something was revealed to me that I'd struggled for all these years.
I guess just knowing that this is what it was a bit of a mystery probably for you.
It was.
Yeah.
I often go over to the Co-op gas bar to get a newspaper. I like to keep up to date on news events. Well, after about 8:30, maybe go over to Co-op and buy groceries. And I do my own cleaning and keeping my area tidy. I don't have a television in my room. I actually have a radio in my sleeping area that I'll listen to the radio news, but I'm not one for sitting square-eyed at a television screen. My dad used to call it the idiot box. You know, in those days they didn't understand about autism and mental health. They figured it was a discipline problem and tried to use strict discipline. In a way, it's sort of cruel because they didn't understand. And the doctors didn't really understand that well at that time either. I got along great with the supervisors, and it was just some of the young female supervisors who didn't have the maturity and the experience in handling people. I had difficulty with them, but the bulk, the experienced, mature supervisors, I got along really well. And I liked that kind of work, I enjoyed it. And I really learned how to handle people. It was great. I was traveling all over the Western Canada. And they have a group called CERT, which is called Community Emergency Response Team, which you go through a bit of training, about 2 days of training usually on weekends, and then you're on a list of, let's say it was a big disaster or something, they have our phone numbers and we will be called. I don't care for people playing the TV sky high that way. Even when I listen to the radio, I keep the volume down. I don't like waiting, I don't like making other people wait. I always like to be on time for my appointments, or a little before time. And the same with, just milling crowd. I don't like going to the Stampede because it's just so crowded. And then you mentioned about smells. I find that this severe air pollution, when they call it air quality advisory, I don't like it. That's one of the reasons I get the paper each day, read through it, and then clip the article. I've got several, send them off to them, and they appreciate it, they really do.
I'll bet.
Most recently, I completed a series of 4 examinations for the 3rd class power engineer license. Passed all 4 exams on the first attempt.
So let's take a closer look at some of those common areas of difficulty that we talked about before the video. So the first one is communication abilities. So people on the spectrum, of course, as I said, may be highly verbal, nonverbal, or somewhere in between. Some of the features you might notice are that some people on the spectrum exhibit an awkward rhythm of speech or an awkward rate of speech. Some of them have difficulty in negotiating the flow of a conversation. And what I mean by that is taking turns talking, noticing when someone else is wanting to say something or perhaps wanting to leave the conversation for some reason, dealing with interruptions and misunderstandings. That can be an issue and a real challenge. Sensing that they are monopolizing the conversation. Some of those are areas that people on the spectrum sometimes do find challenging. Another one, too, that I want to mention is, first of all, dyspraxia, which is a difficulty forming words, and it can also have to do with, sometimes also is exhibited in, poor hand-eye coordination and clumsy movements, but it can also be part of speech as well, difficulty forming certain words. Echolalia is another, it's an interesting one. It's where someone is repeating the words that they hear another person speaking. So, for example, if I might say to my son, "Are you ready to go now?" And he might pause and say, "Are you ready to go now? Are you ready to go now? Are you ready to go now?" And so it's a way for him to slow down and process the information or the question that I've posed. And so that's something that he used to do quite often, is just repeat words that other people have said. So let's look at some of the challenges in social interactions. One might be lack of eye contact. And that doesn't necessarily indicate a lack of attention or a lack of interest. It could just be that so many parts of the conversation are overly stimulating. So it's a way of sort of lowering the level of stimulation by looking away. Difficulty with reading facial expressions, understanding social cues, noticing the body language in others, those that might be indicating something important. We talked a little bit about that already, but that can be a challenge as well. And problems in regulating emotions. So this might be having trouble identifying in their own selves or in others that some negative emotions are arising. And so, suddenly they're very frustrated and upset. Instead of noticing the little steps along the way and dealing with it then, it just suddenly is overly stimulating and overly frustrating and might even lead to a meltdown. So learning how to deal with frustrations as they come, and learning to notice their own body and how their own feelings as things progress, and dealing with it in a healthy way. Lack of flexibility in thinking and behavior. So this is another common challenge. I think routine and sameness is a strategy that a lot of people use to cope with anxiety. And, if you have a lot of things in your life that are unpredictable because of your neurology, it's nice to know that there are some things that you can be in control of and that are predictable. And so I think it just feels safe if there are some things in your life that way. So some things that fall into this category might be food preferences, or certain ways of doing things, like I always do X and then I do Y. Clothing choices. I know that my son has certain clothes that he would wear every day if he could, but it's just certain material and certain colors and the way things feel. He's got some definite favorites there. Routines during the day, certain activities that are done at a certain time. You'll have noticed that with Heather, that in the video that she likes to go to, do her shopping early in the morning, and she always does things in a certain way and in a certain order. This also leads to a lack of ability to cope very well then when things do change, and or when there's a suggestion to try something different. So that predictability can be very soothing and helpful. Another one is special interests. So this is where someone takes an inordinate amount of time thinking and researching and talking about a certain topic, and doing activities around that certain topic. And they don't seem to get bored with it, and in fact find it very pleasurable. So for instance, there was a young man that I was tutoring that was on the spectrum a few years ago, and he was fascinated by game shows in the 1970s. And he researched it, and he watched them on YouTube, and he knew all about them, and he knew all the details about them, and just that was his thing. Our son is certainly very interested in politics and loves to talk about politics, and he also is very interested in video games. And so we've run across in the autism community a number of people with very special interests. Two of the things I wanted to mention. The first is a tendency to be very literal. So those of us that are friends, supporters, need to be aware of that, and if we can, avoid using metaphors and sarcasm that might be taken the wrong way. I'm sure you might be able to come up with some examples too, but I remember one time when I was helping my son with his homework, and I challenged him to do some extra harder questions, and I said, take a stab at these questions. And he was very, very confused and looked at me strangely for a while, and then started with his finger taking a stab at the questions on his paper. So just an example of, I was able to rephrase it, and we were able to continue. But and of course, sarcasm too might be taken the wrong way, saying something like, "Oh, that would be really helpful, wouldn't it?" And it gets understood in the wrong way, and they think, "Oh, so you think this would be helpful?" Another an area is adjusting to life changes. Of course, this is difficult for all of us, but and they inevitably happen to all of us as well. But for people on the autism spectrum, they can be especially challenging because since routine and predictability is helpful in their lives. So life changes such as, the loss of family members or friends, caregiver moving away, if they themselves have to be moved to a new residence, having new neighbors all of a sudden move in near them, those kind of things, they might need help in dealing with events such as that. Issue with a large percentage of people on the spectrum. So they may be hyposensitive, which means undersensitive to certain things, or hypersensitive, which means overly sensitive to other things. So an example of, for my son, of being hyposensitive is he doesn't seem to notice when it's cold out. Would just, quite happily walk to school without a coat on if I didn't mention it in the middle of winter. Doesn't notice when the house is too hot or too cold. Doesn't notice when there's food on his face, or when his clothing doesn't look quite right. So not really sensitive about those kind of things, but very sensitive, overly sensitive about loud noises, bright lights, certain smells, certain tastes. He always liked crunchy things and not sort of soft, gooey things. Touch, if someone would come up and touch him unexpectedly, that was often something he really disliked. And so, of course, multisensory situations like being in a crowded place or a noisy place or a mall or with lots of people can be extremely challenging. So how to help with sensory processing difficulties? Well, first of all, to watch for the signs. What are the signs when someone is becoming overwhelmed with the sensory area? And you get to know the signs as you get to know a person. Some of the possible ways that you can sense that this is happening is perhaps they get just suddenly very easily irritated and upset and non-compliant and, raising their voice. Or on the other hand, some people just totally shut down and just draw into themselves. There can also be, you might notice some repetitive behavior, some self-regulating behavior to try and get control again. So, and we call this stimming. And so this could be flapping their hands, or in our son's case, rocking was something that he would start to do if he was overly stimulated, or pacing, for instance, is another one. So starting to just walk fast in a circle or something. So those are some of the, things to watch out for, and then you know that you need to maybe take some action or help them to remove themselves from that situation. So here are some ways to help if someone is having difficulty, if they're in a situation where it's becoming overwhelming. First of all, I think just to be empathetic and realize something's going on, and to reassure them that you're there to help, and that it's okay for them to leave, and you will help them leave and find a way to remove themselves from that situation and have a break, and help them to find a calmer, quieter location. Maybe it's just on the edge of the action, or maybe it's leaving entirely from the situation. So what happens when there is a meltdown? And this can be just sensory overload. People just might have trouble dealing with multiple noises around them, multiple conversations all happening at once, or they could be just freaked out by a certain loud noise, someone dropping something. But they need time to process what's going on. They need a quiet place to get away. They might need, if it's an unpleasant sound, they might need to just have a break. So their meltdowns are usually sparked by someone who has just had this buildup of not any one specific thing sometimes, but just so many triggers, one on top of the other. And so if you can learn about their triggers, what it is precisely that seems to often cause problems, like loud noises or bright lights, that's great. Then you can help them try to avoid it. But and sometimes the triggers are unusual. I know some of our son's triggers are if something is sliding, so something making a sliding noise just drives him crazy. And so someone, dragging a chair or something in a restaurant. Also, specific interactions with that where there's a high likelihood of being misunderstood or not being able to hear what's going on. So if it's too noisy, or just the anxiety about not knowing what's going on and what's going to happen next. So we know that there are certain triggers for him that we have to help him navigate. And so that's where, having a trusted person with you can be a real help. So just a few more suggestions about what you can do during a meltdown, or if you see one is about to happen. Striving to be as positive as you can, that yes, we can get ourselves out of this situation and it's okay. And to be empathetic to that you understand that they are having trouble with this and it's not their fault. And distracting them if you can by perhaps talking about their area of special interest. Sometimes that has a calming effect. But helping them to have an opportunity to have a graceful exit. So instead of being blowing their top and having a meltdown, to be able to just remove themselves gracefully and quickly from the area. have a lovely story. When my son was in junior high, there was a teacher, a special teacher that knew when he was having problems. She could see the signs, and she knew the signs. And so if she saw that in the middle of a classroom situation he was starting to get agitated, she would give him an envelope. And this was something that they had talked about privately and planned ahead of time. And she would give him this envelope, and she would ask him to take it to the office. And he was in on it, and he knew exactly that this was just an opportunity for him to leave the classroom, go for a walk down to the office with this empty envelope. And the people at the office were in on the strategy as well. They would welcome him to come in and sit down and have a little break. And sometimes he would fix their printer. And then he would head back to class when he was ready. And so that was just a lovely, lovely way for him to gracefully remove himself from the situation that he was finding challenging. So I always was very thankful and very impressed by that teacher. We're going to watch another video now about a senior named Terence, who is a good friend of ours. Wonderful story. It's about 7 minutes long, and I hope you enjoy it.
I was actually a total klutz in school. Like, I was the guy in phys ed class when they wanted to play baseball or football or basketball or something like that. Oh, don't pick me. I'll just go away. I'll go out in the field somewhere and don't bother me. It was probably a very lonely childhood, because I had a lot of difficulty making friends, being in groups of people with other people, with my cohort group, with other young people my same age. Classrooms it was very lonely. I didn't say anything, I didn't mix with people very much or anything like that. Even at university, you just go to class and listen to the professor and leave. It was just easier not to do it. I could just, it's the way I am, and I'm not going to hurt myself by talking to other people. And other people, quite frankly, at that time didn't understand. Their perception was, oh, he's weird. That was a time when they were establishing the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Calgary. And some of my professors were looking for people to work in their laboratories as research assistants. And since I seem to be very good with my hands, much better than with my brain, they hired me as a research associate and working in the laboratory, doing research, and also teaching graduate students research techniques, and basically running all the technical aspects of the research lab in the Faculty of Medicine. So I was there for over 26 years. Being on the Autism Syndrome was actually an advantage, because it gives you certain skills and talents that other people don't have. And I was very good in the laboratory. I was very good at doing research, and because research is almost a solitary occupation. You're totally focused on it. I was in the laboratory 10, 12, 18 hours a day some days, just because I was so obsessive about doing a good job in research. And it worked, because I did some really good research at the university, and it's published. At that point, I started getting more involved in athletics, and because that was a really positive outlet for me. So when I retired, and I said, oh, that's enough of this stuff. I'm gonna try and overcome this myself. So, and athletics has been a tremendous therapy, I guess, for lack of a better word, in becoming less introverted and more extroverted. the last few years I've decided, I'm good at triathlons and athletics, but I gotta learn how to train smarter. Because again, it's part of the obsessive thing. You just continually do things by yourself. And that's probably not the best way to train. So I joined Bankers Hall Club, working with 2 personal trainers, who are awesome people. It's been incredibly beneficial. So that's where I am today.
One down at a time, ready to talk. Excellent. So up there, 4 more sides.
So I thought, well, maybe I just checked out some more. So I talked to a healthcare professional who works in this area, and he asked me some questions, and I told him my story, and he said, yes, in my opinion, that's what you have. And he said, it's nothing to be ashamed of. And he said, the honest truth is there's no treatment for it, and there probably never will be, but you can cope with it. And now that you recognize what it is, and now that you're willing to share that with other people, it's very beneficial to you as a person. Yeah, no, learning about my diagnosis and understanding what it is has made an incredible difference in my life, because I realize I'm not weird, and I'm not strange, and I'm not retarded, and I'm not any of those sorts of things at all. I am just the way I am.
Okay, so we're having to do a single leg reverse pose.
It's still difficult at times. It's still difficult for me to go to a party or be in a group of people. I don't think it's something that will ever change. You try and make it work, but you're always fearful of being in a group of people and having to interact spontaneously in a social setting. It's not that easy, and it's difficult to get to make new friends. Difficult to get out and talk to another person about it, get a close personal relationship. So that's hard, but I'm working on it. I really am. And it's not life-threatening. It's part of life. Everybody is different in the world, and everybody has their weaknesses and their strengths. This is mine.
One of the big challenges for seniors is housing. And the question that comes to mind is what happens when parents or other family members can no longer provide care or provide housing. Aging caregivers like my husband and I worry about this. Seniors with ASD, especially those who have high needs or medium-high needs, often end up in nursing homes or seniors facilities when they get older and when family is not around them any longer. Not always, but a move to living in a nursing home or a seniors facility can lead to increased isolation, lack of independence, increase in behavioral problems, and a decline in mental health and in physical health. This can be especially true of seniors on the autism spectrum, but I think it's an area where we as a society have to move ahead and use our imaginations and come up with some new solutions. Luckily, there are some amazing examples and models out there, and I'd like to talk about 3 of them. These are models of care and housing which have really made a difference in the lives of seniors with autism. The first one is in Wales, and it's basically a network that has been set up in a number of communities in Wales for helping adults on the spectrum. And so it's a support service. It promotes early intervention and provides a community-based support in the community where the person lives. And there are, it has to do with not only housing, but also other supports as well that are needed. And so there are 22 Welsh communities that are involved in this initiative. And they have a lead officer and a stakeholder group in each community that consists of people with autism and people who are family members, but also volunteers, autism-related charities, professionals, all coming around together around these people and coming up with solutions. Autism Denmark is it's a government-supported, specialized housing facilities that are located in a number of different sites in Denmark, and each one is very supportive atmosphere, very adaptive environment depending on the issues and challenges of each person who's living in these housing sites. And the staff and the residents work together and live together, and it becomes a real community of care. And the third one is there's 3 villages in France that have been called the Sesame villages, and they serve people on the autism spectrum. There's a picture here of one of the villages. And so there's a personalized plan for each person who is living there, their care, their well-being, their learning independent skills, their health care. And there's multidisciplinary teams that are involved in each village and help them to develop their social skills in lots of different ways too. But all 3 of these I think are just where a group of people came together and said, we want to make a difference in the quality of care and the quality of life for these people in our community. So various publications and organizations have identified the most common or the most frequent life challenges for seniors living with ASD. And one of them is getting a diagnosis. Not all doctors feel qualified to do this, work in this area. So there is often a shortage of doctors that feel able to give a diagnosis of ASD in many communities. And as you could see from the stories of Heather and Terence, it makes a difference knowing more, getting more information about and getting a diagnosis. So it can also trigger some funding and other helps and other supports too. So that's important. Using transportation, finding out about transportation options, that's another area of challenge. Shopping. Maintaining a healthy diet, and we see this with a lot of people, that they tend to just eat the same things over and over again and not get the variety that they need. And because sometimes too there's some sensory things going on, might not like vegetables, for instance, for whatever reason. So that's can be an issue. Cleaning and keeping their place of residence well organized can be a challenge. Sometimes there's issues like hoarding, or sometimes it's just not on the top of their list to keep things in good shape in their place of residence. So they might need help with that. Filling out government forms and even knowing about what government supports are available. That can also be an area where they might require assistance. Another one is access to medical care. So getting to doctor's appointments, finding doctors, especially specialists, making appointments, taking medications on time, going and getting prescriptions. Those are all, that's an area where there can be some challenges. Seeking out appropriate social connections. So not only taking making the effort to connect with other people, but making sure that they are doing so in a way that is healthy and good for them, and finding people and activities to do that are life-giving and positive. Finding ways to be physically active. Again, making those decisions and finding places or organizations that can help them with that. Maintaining interests that they already have, expanding their interests, which is always, I think a really good path to take to expand their world and their the things that they are exposed to, learning new skills. So that's another challenge. Just want to end with some final general suggestions that that I've come up with in speaking with other families who have a member that's on the autism spectrum, and speaking to some self-advocates and some people who are on the spectrum themselves. First of all, I heard this from a young man, and I thought it was so good. There's no us and them, it's just us. We're all in this together. And I think that's especially feels true right now. Some other suggestions are to put yourself in their shoes. Just imagine what it must be like, having all these challenges in their life. Assume their competence. So start speaking to them as you would as anyone who is any other person of their age, and go from there. Adjust and adapt as you need to. Warn them ahead of time, if possible, about any changes in an expected routine. If you can, let them know that things aren't going to be the same as they always are. Explain why, and give them time to process that. It's always helpful if you can use visuals and use gestures to just kind of also help explain expectations. So I think that's a good example is just if you want someone to sign their name somewhere, you hand them a pen and point to the place where you want them to sign. Other visual helps are always great to have around the house. Picture reminders, planners, a to-do list, writing out the daily schedule, having a list of phone numbers ready for people that they can call if they need help. So, there's having things like that around that are good suggestions and helpful reminders. I think two things that came up a lot in conversations that I was having in this area was not rushing people and not crowding people either. So space and time are two gifts that we can give to each other. And choosing your battles wisely. This is something I certainly, as a mom, have come to understand. There are some things that it's just not worth getting into the battle about, and I've learned to let go of a lot of things, and it's been good for me to be able to learn how to do that. So I'll just also mention that it's important not to assume that someone knows what you're getting at, or assume that they know what you're expecting. So to clearly define what you're looking for and what you hope is going to happen in a certain situation. So to really be clear about that. This is an important one that I've learned. Instead of just automatically trying to be helpful and impulsively trying to help out, let me carry that for you, or, here, I can do that. Instead, asking permission first. Asking permission before taking action. Just giving that respect and that time for them to process what it is that you're wanting to do. And perhaps the answer is no, I can do it myself. And so to honor that. To be sensory aware. We talked about this a little bit earlier about knowing a person's triggers. Maybe it's bright lights. Maybe it's sudden noises. Maybe it's smells. It's being in a restaurant with lots of different smells might be a problem. Find out the triggers and try to help them navigate them, or avoid them. I've also noticed that I've noticed with my own son that when he is having, has had, some kind of an injury, he often doesn't feel pain in the same way that I do. So he is a person who I can't really rely on his telling me about whether something is painful or not, because he doesn't feel the pain in the same sharp way that I do. So people on the spectrum sometimes describe symptoms as being less painful than they really are in reality, and that perhaps that something does need to be examined by a doctor. And but they aren't feeling the acuteness of the pain in the same way that I might be. I also wanted to make the point that we all have different aspirations in life, and sometimes people on the spectrum have very different personal aspirations, that goals that they're working towards maybe have to do with their special interests that might be very different than that of yours or of others. So, but they still deserve our respect and our support. On this same topic, if you can, get involved, learn more about their special interests, and engage with them and honor those special interests. Ask questions, be curious. And know that sometimes certain behaviors which can be possibly disturbing, and I'm talking about being argumentative, being loud, being overly talkative, perhaps being too quiet, being perceived as doing something that's perceived as being very rude or impertinent. These can be caused by anxiety. They can also just be something that the person is totally unaware of that they are doing, or that this might be disturbing to others. And finally, I'd just like to say the importance of accepting and welcoming everyone just as they are on their journey, and to assume and to know that we can learn from each other. And lots to learn for all of us out there. And I hope that this presentation has been a help for you, and has also perhaps given you some food for thought about people on the autism spectrum and how you can become a friend and a support. These are some of the sources of the information that I shared with you today, and this list is available at Autism Calgary.